Uh-oh. Nope, it's not working. Hello, it's not working, is it? Can't hear. Oh no. You can. He was just a lot louder. Why is it still going? Is it working? You can. He was just a lot louder. Yeah. Confusing. Is it working? Okay, there we go. All right. Emotional intelligence. Now, I think you just have to face facts. Now, I was very analytic kid, still pretty analytic in my mindset, which really means traditional analysis has a wide spectrum of possible applications, insofar as that it's just this reduction of breaking things into parts and being a system maker, as opposed to somebody who tries to find a gestalt, right? Like to find the feeling of something. Now, I think it's pretty clear that, a gestalt is the way the mind has of formulating this really complicated, like, matrix of information. It's supposed to get the gist of a complicated situation in just a one little data point, which is this feeling, but the feeling itself is quite subtle, and yet it's also this solitary single thing, right? It feels that way, at least. And that's the point. You take a complex situation and turn it into one kind of feeling, and the brain is able to handle these complex feelings. You can have a situation with 3 or 4 feelings, and it still can be handled, when in reality each single feeling is quite complex. So emotional intelligence, we have to face facts. It's well, I won't say whether it's easy or not, because some people may find it easier or not. But it's definitely, I think of it as complex, but the people that are good at it, it comes to them naturally. And it can come more naturally if you don't bother with the more intellectual side of intelligence. But, it's like recognizing body language. And it comes down to, handling your emotions, but also possibly manipulating your emotions, right? So there's a gradient or spectrum between handling emotions or manipulating emotions, your own emotions and other people's emotions. I personally, I think that the main thing is to worry about handling your own emotions. They're complicated enough. You try to let the emotions of others be. But there's a Heisenberg principle for emotions, which is if you go and observe another creature's emotions, then you'll affect it. You can try to not be noticed, but there's the whole feeling like there's eyes on the back of your head kind of thing. And it's, in the end, often you will be noticed, and you disturb those emotions when you interact by observing them, or at least by being observed observing them. And so in my case, being very, an attitude collector of, interested in the variety of ideas that might factually and actually be out there in the world, I end up interfering with emotions and then being accused of manipulating emotions. But then let's say you spy on an animal to see how it's behaving. Is that manipulative? I mean, you're kind of manipulating it by not letting it know a factor of its environment is that it's being observed, right? So even if you don't manipulate in some technical sense because you were spying, you didn't interact, that would even count. And of course, if you interact, then how are you supposed to act to not manipulate? I don't know. You're going to try to, like if somebody is nice because being polite is, you know, like it makes things go smoother, is that manipulative? To me, it's a choice, and that's what makes it an emotional intelligence. Is like to the degree that you have a choice of how you behave, right? Like we often feel like, well, if somebody does that, I got to do this. You got, if somebody attacks you with a knife, you've got to defend yourself or run, or maybe you're backed into a corner and you only have to defend yourself, or you fight back. And we make these decisions that we feel forced or say they're forced, and I agree that's a valid to claim that in any given situation, but in general, what you're trying to do is have the ability um, to have multiple options, right? When an emotional situation comes, you have multiple emotional, it's not just fight, it's not just flight, and it's not even just fight or flight. It's like all kinds of choices ideally would be available to you, and you would go down these different choices. You would begin take a step on the path of one of these choices, really, by choosing among various emotions. Like if somebody insults you, you might only have the idea of fighting back, or you might only have the idea of laughing it off. But you can also have the idea of doing either one of those things. Now, you can't analytically, with non emotional intelligence, really analyze a situation like that and decide. Um, we would call that artificial, not because there's anything wrong with it, but just because um, you can't make an emotional decision with a calculation like that. A calculation that's analytic and breaking things down into some sort of fundamental information set. You've got to use the formula that the brain has available for combining emotions as themselves. So, not a function that takes numbers and measurement and time and all of that, but functions that take emotions, and then the emotions can be combined. Now, this is possible because the brain evolved to control the sense. We can easily deduce to control the sense and motor functions of the body, right? And it's equally clear that the primary way it does that uh, for mammals is through an emotional situation, probably through all, animals and, maybe even all creatures in general. Something similar to an emotional system. In other words, this analytic idea, it's the add-on. It's a calculator that an actual mammal, a regular mammal, is using, but that basic mammal thing is a body language tied to emotion. I mean, how do you convey something through body language if you do have a high emotional intelligence, but maybe are manipulative of others? How do people do that? Well, they convey things through their body language, and they make signals that people take almost on an automatic level as having certain concrete meanings. And um, that's possible because if you can direct the flow of your own emotions, they show themselves on the face. I mean, people that want to become a good liar will learn to have the emotions of an honest person fed through sort of the like the emotional tape that goes to the face. Actors will learn how to put that up in the part of their emotional calculus that shows on your face. And so that kind of thing can't be done. It's not necessarily automatically good. I'm not saying it's a good thing, obviously. You know, you can use it for manipulation, and I think we suffer from that a lot in our society, in the world, all the societies, as far as I know today. I'm saying it's effective, and it's the basic thing. Like the purpose of the analytic analysis is also to help balance our emotions in a more fine way. You have to learn how to manage and flow with your own emotions, uh, first before you can do anything with analysis. The noise of emotions is too loud. You know what I mean? It's like if it's not calm, then you can't have the fine tuning, super fine, high powered microscope, electron tunneling microscope um, type resolutions, right? Because the resolution of emotions is rough because it's making some great approximations to say, here's the situation, here's the vibe that I'm feeling from it. It's a big approximation, really useful. It's a mystery why it can be used so well. Those of us that are super analytic know that you can't really trust it. You need to double check it with more reasonable logic, so-called analytic analysis. Um, and that's basically the idea. It's like you can make a lot of grounds with an emotional calculus, but then you got to double check it. But if you have multiple possible emotions of ways that you can imagine feeling about a particular situation that you have, then you can have time to run through all three or four or five of those, and then apply the analysis to double check them and see if you think it doesn't pass the sanity check, for example. Um, because that's something that your logic and reason and material consequence can do, is give a sanity check to some emotional conclusion. Um, like you're having a fight or flight reaction, and you can check that and go, it's actually neither one of those things. I just feel a little uncomfortable. To me, the ideal way of thinking about the emotional control that isn't neither manipulative nor is it just like handling, like forcing and like baggage handling, is that your emotions are like a river, a flow, there's too much complexity to understand every little subcurrent, but you can kind of be aware of wherever you are in that current. And it makes a lot of sense because, your brain has a lot of emotional things going on you can kind of feel, but then you don't. And it's just a lot like a river of a limited size, but, and I swam a lot of rivers in California, the Tuolumne before it was dammed and stuff. And so to me, a river that's 20 or 30 feet wide, I'm thinking with various kinds of rapids. And you can go with the flow. I mean, there were dangerous rapids there when I was 8. I swam down to the part that was famous for catching people. Well, I knew it had this suction thing. I didn't go down there blind. If you swam down there with your eyes open and knew what was going on, it was a little pocket. It wouldn't really probably catch you unless, you were really unlucky and knocked your head and things like that. If you go with the flow, the water doesn't beat you up and smash you against the rocks. The water's going and going around the rocks, so you gotta go with the water, like they say. On the other hand, I had a friend who did that one time in the ocean, and he'd had a lot of success with it, but it was record surf that day, and at that day the water went with smashing against the rock, and he did not survive that, and he floated out to sea. Um, so yeah, ultimately our forms of logic have to be compatible with or directly work with emotional things. And that's why I include spirit and art, or spirituality and the arts, in my conception of the ground floor foundational level of philosophies, because spirit has to do with being alive. It's funny, because we have everything backwards. It's like, oh no, it's about being a dead. No, no, the idea of spirit, things that have spirit are things that are breathing, living things, as opposed to dead things, right? And that's an important distinction, because not only are there the living things like an animal and a non-living thing like a rock, but sometimes that living thing, the animal, becomes a non-living thing, and it's still the same shape and stuff, but just from its behavior. And that behavior we call having spirit. Having that kind of a behavior is having a spirit, no matter what type of animal or creature. If it's living, that's where that comes from. And these are the things that are having the stream of experiences, which are all laced with emotion. Arguably, you could call them all emotion, but we make distinctions about colors and certain senses. But in a way, the emotions are all just like the other senses. They might not be as reliable as your sight, because with sight, you can have a visual hallucination, but it's pretty reliable. Whereas with an emotion, um, it's probably more likely that you're going to have an emotional hallucination than the valid one, at least in this current society with our current state of emotional balance and whatnot. Speaking for all of us. In the end, no matter what you think, even if you think, oh, emotions is just a stupid animal thing, we should be up in the clouds, just with that analytic philosophy. In order to do that, you have to calm the emotional waters. You have to get emotional balance to calm those waters. Otherwise, the waves are too choppy to do the fine little work. And look at the delicate ripples of analytic thought. Emotions are just on a whole stronger energetic scale than than anything in you know mathematical or empirical, or even just whatever whatever kind of practical system, or pragmatics, or physicalist, or a mechanical, what I would call materialist system. Um, and they won't adhere straight to the materialist system. It's not clear how the emotion relates to like the physical arrangement of things, because it's in the abstract. It's how things are interacting. If you have a foreboding emotional fear of the place you're in, it could be because there's scary noises and gunfire and things maybe that are materially of a danger, and you could see, well, that's why I'm afraid. And yet there still remains, this separation, unlike a materialistic analysis where you got measurements of time and space and mass, and sequences of events, and footprints mean that a person was there in this sort of logical consequence. Motions don't always, and often don't, follow that kind of logical consequence. They have a logical consequence of their own, that people like, I don't know, Alfred Hitchcock evidently understood. The people that can play with our emotions so effectively as an audience, it's evidence that they understand that there's some sort of a logic of how these things go together. It's kind of funny that we react to that logic like super effectively, more than we understand how it works. Um, and what I'm saying is, those of us that are analytic, which I think most people that want to watch me are, because it doesn't matter how, what your input principles, you might get the wrong, totally opposite end of the stick, but trying to be an analytic analysis, you just have to face facts. That job number one is an emotional analysis, where your own emotions can be analyzed to the point where you can create a smooth surface in which to do the fine grained, granular, high resolution work of analytic philosophy, which in the end will be done simply to apply back to that emotional a smoothing that you are attempting to do or did do. You will use that to, you know, to vet and peer review ideas that ultimately will continue to come from your emotional uh, calculus, your emotional logic, your emotional intelligence.